Good morning, everybody. Great to be together in person, on Zoom, and for those watching what we now call asynchronously. This is our second to last in our Modern Jewish Thinkers series. Rev Ezra has the makeup class for the one that wasn't able to take place last Thursday. That's going to be next Thursday, the 24th. That's Rev Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and Proto-Zionism next Thursday at 11 a.m. And that will conclude our Modern Jewish Thinkers series. And I'm really excited today to be sharing with you about a contemporary personality who is alive and kicking, producing outstanding content, and I think a really influential and important figure in our modern Orthodox community, our Jewish community, our global community. Her name is Dr. Erica Brown. I'm sure she'll be more or less familiar to various of us. I'm certain she's been to HIR, although I don't know if we ever had her formally as a scholar in residence. I ran into her recently at a wedding of a mutual friend and was able to express my gratitude to her for all of her teaching, scholarship, and leadership. I didn't at the time yet know I was going to be teaching about her, so I haven't gotten a chance to tell her that yet. But I look forward to telling her that we studied and analyzed her contributions to modern Jewish thought and Jewish life today. So I'm really excited to be sharing about her with all of you. I'm going to share my screen just in a moment, but before I do, I think the overview that I want to offer, with some of our thinkers who are totally new or unfamiliar, and also for those who are familiar, the question at some level I want to ask is, what is it that they are contributing that's unique or new or different to our Jewish conversation? Who are they, and what are they adding to our collective modern Jewish thought, discourse, and lives today? And I think with Dr. Erica Brown, the more I've thought about and read her writings, I think that she unconsciously and consciously molds herself in the framework of her primary mentor, which was the great Lord Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. She was a devoted student of his. She was a graduate student of his. She's written extensively about her experiences learning with him and from him, about the way he impacted her as a mentor, about his style. And if you read Rabbi Sacks, and we've had many, especially with Rabbanit Bracha, many opportunities to study Rabbi Sacks's writings through the shul, and they're so widespread and accessible online and through his books, commercially. I really do see her as someone who continues his approach in I think a few central ways. One is the capacity to seamlessly interweave Jewish texts from across the strata of Jewish texts, that is to say, biblical texts, rabbinic texts, medieval philosophy, modern Jewish thinkers, on all of that, Torah ideas and texts on the one hand, with sort of the best that modern culture has to offer, ranging from secular philosophy to sociology to, cultural critics, and theorists and thought leaders, and into also, more contemporary, I don't know, call it, lowbrow culture, but pop culture, music and film, literature of different kinds. She's someone who really brings all those things to bear. That's one thing that they have in common. I think they're both incredibly talented writers. Just the way that they use the written word is poetic and lyrical. Where I see maybe, and I think that their areas of concern are overlapping. The broad contemporary challenges that we face as human beings in the world today at an interfaith level, the place of religion in public life, the relationship between religion and politics, all of these things were of central concern to both of them. If I were going to differentiate between them in one particular area, it would be, and this is not a judgment, really, it's just a distinction. I think that Rabbi Sacks was kind of up here in his balcony view and in his sort of focus on the big ideas. And I think that Erica Brown is here in a way that I really appreciate, in a way of sort of drawing from the big ideas, but speaking in very concrete and specific areas about our lives. We're going to look at two very particular sort of policy and lived life issues that she addresses, that it's hard for me to imagine a Rabbi Sacks essay on the Parsha that would write in the way that she does, because it's almost too specific, and he's always so global and broad. So there's a way in which I appreciate her attention to particular narrower issues, ideas, details of daily life, as we'll see in a minute, and a way in which, in being a little bit more informal of a writer, a little bit more kind of popular as a writer, there are certain ways in which I think she's more accessible. Of course, one of Rabbi Sacks's incredible contributions was he took the vast and deep and esoteric ideas of Jewish thought and made them accessible to a broad public. But I think that she does it in a sort of even more, Hamish, accessible kind of way. But I really do think that she intentionally models herself. As we're about to read in her bio, she is the vice provost for values and leadership at Yeshiva University and the founding director of its Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. So she's really, even viewed by YU as the kind of next generation of promulgating Rabbi Sacks's teachings. But she very much also, as I want to express here, has her own approach and style, even if in the mold, in a slightly more, however, I'm struggling to find the words, down to earth, detail oriented kind of framework. The other last thing, which I would say is extremely common between the two of them, is a focus on leadership. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks spoke all the time about leadership and its many different forms and levels, and that's an absolute, preoccupation bordering on obsession of Dr. Erica Brown, is the question of leadership. And I would say we'll see it in two ways. One, classical leaders, the people who are actually in roles and assigned positions of leadership at the large scale level. What are their qualities? How should they behave? How do we deal with when they misbehave? That's one. And then second, the call to leadership for all of us, the idea that every one of us can and should be a leader in different ways. So that's sort of the overall framework, things that I've distilled as I think about her writing and her contributions. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see that play out in the many excerpts I hope we'll have a chance to look at today. So I'm going to share my screen. And for those who have the packet in front of them, we're on page 1, the front page, and you can see, starting with her biography. Just make this a little more visible, hopefully, for the folks on Zoom. Yes, so Dr. Erica Brown is the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University, the founding director of its Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. She previously served as the director of the Mayberg Center for Jewish Education and Leadership and an associate professor of curriculum and pedagogy at the George Washington University. Erica is the author or co-author of 15 books on leadership, the Hebrew Bible, and spirituality. After we finish her bio, we're going to look at her books, and I'm going to make some comments about what I think she's trying to do in this range of books, which, her bio talks about these three areas: leadership, the Hebrew Bible, and spirituality. Erica has been published in the New York Times, the Atlantic, Tablet, First Things, and the Jewish Review of Books. I think it's actually fair to say that these publications, by the way, kind of, cover a spectrum from left of center to right of center. It shows you that she's not someone who's easily politically pigeonholed. And I think that's important for a figure whose goal is to speak to the broader Jewish community and the greater world. Certainly it was true of Rabbi Sacks that he, couldn't be pigeonholed into a particular political or partisan position. And a monthly column for the New York Jewish Week. She has blogged for Psychology Today, Newsweek, Washington Post's on faith, right? So here you can see not just in the realm of Jewish publications, but in, broader consumption. She's someone who speaks as a representative of religion in the public square, as faith to a global community, and JTA, and tweeted on one page of Talmud study a day at Dr. Erica Brown. She herself went through Daf Yomi over the 7.5-year cycle, finished not that long ago. She has a piece on her website, reflections on completing the Talmud. She has a master's degrees from the Institute of Education, University of London, Jews College, University of London. That's where she studied with Rabbi Dr. Sachs, and Harvard University, and a PhD from Baltimore Hebrew University, my hometown. Erica was a Jerusalem Fellow, is a faculty member of the Wexner Foundation, an Avichai Fellow, and the recipient of the 2009 Covenant Award for her work in education. She was the scholar in residence at both the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, that was her long stint in Washington, Combined Jewish Philanthropies of Boston, as well as the community scholar for the Jewish Center of New York. She currently serves as a community scholar for Congregation Eitz Chaim in Livingston, New Jersey. So you can see, other than her time, yeah, she's done everything, Mama Toby says. Other than her time in England, primarily based in the Northeast, and has served, academic institutions, Jewish community institutions, federations. She has a beautiful piece in Jewish Action going back a number of years. Obviously, it's not the elephant in the room, but it's worth noting that she is a woman, and occupying these kinds of positions of leadership, public front-facing, representative of the Jewish community, etc., as a modern Orthodox woman is noteworthy. Thank God, slightly less noteworthy than it used to be, but still noteworthy. And she has certainly written about, while most of what she writes and talks about is not gender specific, she's certainly written about her experiences as a modern Orthodox Jewish woman in these spheres of leadership. And she has a very important piece, and she's written a couple of pieces about this, sort of around the question of women's roles in spiritual leadership. And she writes in one place and at one point, I wouldn't recommend my path to other Orthodox Jewish women. It's been too fraught, too complicated, hard to figure out what my title is and move about different Jewish communities. And that was, I think, what's the right word? Just standing as the Torah passes us by. That was a concerning message, right? Because we don't want that to be the message. Don't follow my path. And I think even since the time that she's written it, things have continued to evolve and change. If you look at these 12 books that she has written, and by the way, she's coming out soon with a book on Kohelet, on Ecclesiastes, called Kohelet and the Meaning of Life. So I'm just going to name each of these books and what they're about, and then I want to try to kind of put them in a bigger picture here. So she has Take Your Soul to Work, 365 meditations on everyday leadership. She has Return, Daily Inspiration for the Days of Awe, 10 sections for the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, as today is Rosh Chodesh Elul. We're already thinking about the high holiday season. She has In the Narrow Places, Daily Inspiration for the 3 weeks, the season we just finished not that long ago. Leadership in the Wilderness, Authority, and Anarchy in the Book of Numbers. Okay, so this is a study of Sefer Bamidbar, which we also just finished reading not that long ago, and the study of primarily Moshe Rabbeinu and his leadership in the book of Bamidbar. Jonah, the Reluctant Prophet, Haggadah Shel Pesach, Seder Talk, a conversational Haggadah, Confronting Scandal, How Jews Can Respond When Jews Do Bad Things, The Case for Jewish Peoplehood, Can We Be One, Inspire Jewish Leadership, Practical Approaches to Building Strong Communities, Happier Endings, a meditation on life and death, Spiritual Boredom, rediscovering the wonder of Judaism, and Esther, Power, Fate, and Fragility in Exile. So clearly, as her bio describes, you see sort of biblical commentary, you see spirituality, and what was described as the third, you see leadership, of course. I think it's worth noting that as you cycle through the Jewish calendar year, she's really sort of touched on almost every season, right? So starting where we are now, you have, her daily inspiration for the days of awe. That takes us Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Then you come to Sukkot when we read the book of Kohelet, and she has her forthcoming book on Kohelet. Nothing on Hanukkah, but then we come around to Purim, and she has her book on Megillat Esther. We come to Pesach. By the way, I jumped over Yonah, of course, which is Yom Kippur as well. Come to Pesach, and you have Seder Talk. As you get into sort of Shavuot, she has nothing specific to that, but basically Shavuot and through the summer is the book of Bamidbar. And so therefore she has her book that takes you through kind of the late spring and summer with the book of Bamidbar. And then that takes us to the 3 weeks where she has her book with daily inspiration for the 3 weeks. And that brings us all the way around again. And so you can kind of journey through the year with Dr. Erica Brown's writings. That's sort of one kind of frame. And I think that's itself an intentional message, the idea that not just the holidays, but the seasons of the year, the books that we read have messages for us that we can take on a daily basis. And no better proof than than this book that she has of literally 365 meditations on everyday leadership. So she's trying to draw leadership lessons and sort of just daily messages, the idea that the seasons give us unique messages for every moment, that the books of the Tanakh teach us messages for daily living and for leadership, and that there are leadership lessons to be gleaned sort of at all times. So her books sort of interact and intersect to kind of create this, web that you can draw from at all times. And I find that to be very, very powerful. These are her books. She has, extensive writing. She wrote a weekly column for a long time in the Jewish Week. She did Parsha over the course of a year, Parsha lessons for leadership, and, just many, many published essays of all kinds. You can go to her website, ericabrown.com, and read a lot of those things. I thought it would be fun to start, and we're well underway, but to start our text study, not with something that she wrote, but with something that was written about her. So this was a New York Times op-ed from December 20th, 2010. We're on page 2 now of the packet, by David Brooks. And it was about his discovery of Dr. Erica Brown. So I'm going to kind of excerpt for us. The first 3 paragraphs, he sort of says, everyone's been talking about this person, Erica Brown, and I didn't know who she was, so I decided to find out. So the 4th paragraph says, then I invited her to coffee, and it all became clear. Brown has what many people are looking for these days. In the first place, she has conviction. For her, Judaism isn't a punchline or a source of neuroticism. It's a path to self-confident and superior living. She didn't seem hostile to the things that make up most coffee table chatter, status, celebrity, policy, pop culture. She just didn't show much interest. As one of her students emailed me, Erica embodies Judaism's stand against idol worship. It's actually true that she worships nothing other than God, which is particularly unusual in Washington, right, where she was living at the time. Then there is the matter of how she speaks. Somehow, and I'm not going to be able to capture this adequately, she combines extreme empathy with extreme tough-mindedness. In her classes and groups, she tries to create arduous, countercultural communities. We live in a relativistic culture, she told me. Many people have no firm categories to organize their thinking. They find it hard to give a straight yes or no answer to tough moral questions. When they go in search of answers, they generally find people who offer them comfort and ways to ease their anxiety. Brown tries to do the opposite. Jewish learning, she says, isn't about achieving tranquility. It's about the struggle. I try to make people uncomfortable. Brown will sometimes gather her students who are accomplished adults, right? She focuses in adult education in so many ways, and tell them to turn off their cell phones in unison before class. She will have a late seat, a chair placed directly next to her for a student who didn't manage to make it to class on time. She writes about the fear adults bring into the classroom, the fear of looking stupid, the fear of confessing how little they know about their religion, the fear teachers have of being unmasked in front of students. With prodding and love, she tries to exploit those fears and turn them into moments of insufficiency and learning. Her classes are dialogues structured by ancient texts. She may begin with a topic, when Jews do bad things, or boredom is so interesting. She will present a biblical text or a Talmudic teaching and mix it with modern quotations. She may ask students to write down some initial reflections, then try to foment a fierce discussion. Brown seems to poke people with concepts that sit uncomfortably with a modern mindset. Submission and sin. She writes about disorienting situations, vengeance, scandal, group shame. During our coffee, she criticized the way some observers bury moral teaching under legal casuistry, and the way some moderns try to explain away the unfashionable things the Torah clearly says, right? In other words, she takes the Torah and takes it seriously, the parts that make us uncomfortable in modern times and what they still have to teach us. She pushes the highly successful. No, serving the poor for a few days a year isn't enough. Yes, it is necessary to expose a friend's adultery because his marriage is more important than your friendship. All of this sounds hard, but Brown thinks as much about her students as her subject matter. You can't be Jewish alone, she told me. So learning is a way to create communities and relationships. I concluded that Brown's impact stems from her ability to undermine the egos of the successful at the same time that she lovingly helps them build better lives. She offers a path out of the tyranny of the perpetually open mind by preserving authoritative traditions and teachings. Most educational institutions emphasize individual advancement. Brown nurtures the community and the group. It's interesting that her work happens in the world of adult education. Americans obsess about K through 12 education. The country has plenty of religious institutions, but adult education, in other words, she's saying we've got school for kids and synagogue for grown-ups, but where's the school for grown-ups? Adult education is an orphan, an amorphous space in between. This is a shame, but it also gives Brown the space to develop her method. This nation is probably full of people who'd be great adult educators, but there are few avenues to bring those teachers into contact with mature and hungry minds. Now you hear about such people by word of mouth. So he captures here, I think, a lot of what I've already tried to say and what I hopefully we will see about that kind of blending of opposites, compassion, empathy, understanding the complexity of people's lives, with also really strong, firm moral stances and kind of pushing back against various dimensions of our modern lives from the mouth of the Torah, and the blending of the Torah's texts, with contemporary, secular philosophy, wisdom, cultural references, and the like. So I thought it was just a great little, summary of who she is from a New York Times columnist. Now I want to look at two.
It was 13 years ago.
It was 13 years ago. Yeah, and it feels like some things have changed. Yes.
Some things are the same.
Yes. I think her voice is needed as much now, if not more than ever. So I want to look at two pieces, that reflect more of her kind of down to earth, talking about real issues in lived life, and I think really, dovetail beautifully with what we just read from David Brooks. So the first one, I'll give a little background, and she references a little bit in her piece. In 2016, she wrote a piece in the Jewish Week. It was sort of like an open letter to Jewish institutions, in which she basically was called "Exclusion is on the Menu." She talked about how the fact that her work brings her to all kinds of functions. She goes to all kinds of Jewish, communal institutions, educational institutions, gala events and seminars, and that there is often not kosher food is what's being served. And she always, is accommodated with the kosher meal. And her kind of question and challenge was, why be exclusionary to the kosher keepers in this way? Why not send a message that we're all welcome by literally, catering to the range of people in the room? And also, whether your personal practice is kosher keeping or not, why not send the message that Jewish communal institutions uphold these traditional ideas? Okay, it costs a little more. Okay, the food might taste a little less good, but it's leaning into our core traditions and practices, even if they might not be the practices of some or all of the individuals in the room. So it was a letter to the editor in the New York Jewish Week, got all kinds of responses, and this is her follow-up response to the respondents that was published in the Jewish Week. So again, you can already see, it's hard for me to picture Rabbi Sacks writing this piece because it's just sort of so specific, and yet it's desperately needed to spark communal conversation. So here it is. It's not just about the menu. The Jewish Week in May 2016. Some decades ago, as the American Jewish community was becoming more deeply entrenched in its denominational ruts, Dennis Prager wrote a provocative article, Beyond Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, Aspiring to be a Serious Jew. In it, he wrote that he cared little about denominational affiliation. What he cared about, what he felt was the question of the hour was, are you a serious Jew? Wherever you are on the spectrum of observance or intention, is there depth, meaning, and purpose to your Jewish life? There are serious Jews who take Jewish law seriously. There are serious Jews who take Jewish culture seriously, or prayer, or Jewish history, or the Hebrew language, fill in the blank. And then there are scores and scores of people today who on surveys check just Jewish. This may be a reaction to pigeonholing people to movements. To the credit of sociologists and demographers who use this expression, it's a whole lot better than the sterile and irritating word affiliation, which may mean paying membership and little else. But just Jewish does not mean much as an identity marker, because it doesn't describe what one thinks, does, or feels as a Jew. It may at base simply mean that someone is not lying about his or her faith or ethnicity. That's a pretty low bar. It's worse than Parev. I say this as a response to my article on making Jewish organizational dinners kosher. I'm gratified by the dozens of you who wrote me or commented on my article, Exclusion on the Menu. A special thanks to Esther Kaplan from Commack, Long Island. It's been a really long time since I got a letter that was hand typed. I loved it. Right? Again, this just noting this little style. And again, I'm using Rabbi Sachs as the foil. He speaks to, world Jewry or humanity, but not in that personalized style, I think. I mean, sometimes he does, but not in that personalized style that I think is more characteristic of Erica Brown. It's like she's literally having a conversation with you when she writes. And I think that there's something powerful to that. More readers than I realized are clearly struggling with feeling excluded when they go to Jewish dinners. Practically speaking, a number of serious Orthodox donors share that they do not give to certain organizations because they feel that their money is welcome, but their company is not. But it was not just Orthodox or traditional readers who contacted me. A host of people who work professionally or on a volunteer basis for the Jewish community feel disappointed by the choice their organization or another makes to ignore the kosher option. This has little to do with observance and a lot to do with stirring authentic Jewish feeling at a Jewish event. This is a critical conversation, not only about kosher food, but also about kosher pluralism. Aaron Potek, a YCT graduate, in what we talk about when we talk about the menu on May 20th, right? So you can see this is a back and forth, does not feel that Jewish organizations should serve only kosher food, and is not bothered by the difficult plastic wrap that is always a struggle for me. He wants us all to feel uncomfortable to accommodate pluralism. I get that. I often say that comfortable people don't grow, meaning his argument is we should really accept and embrace everybody's own practice. And that means that non-kosher people should not be required to keep kosher by serving that at a Jewish organizational dinner. And the people who do keep kosher will be given kosher food. And that's the way that we honor everybody the way they are. But let's be clear. I'm not now or ever going for what Potek called the frummest common denominator, right? He was sort of in his piece, which you don't have here, he was sort of pushing back against this idea that why do we always have to cater, it's no pun intended, but it keeps coming up. Why do we always have to cater to the strictest opinion? Then we're not giving room for people to really be themselves. And maybe their less strict opinion is driven by a different Jewish value. But if we always go to the strictest, we flatten the conversation. And she says, that's not what I'm suggesting here. I'm not suggesting going for the frummest common denominator, but trying instead to avoid the lowest common denominator, the least substantive glue that connects us as a community. I'm going for content, for solidarity, for unity, for ritual, for history, for connection, for intimacy with our tradition, for a Jewish flavor that is not made with a bland consomme powder masking itself as chicken soup. Right? She's saying, I think there's something thick and robust to serving kosher food at all Jewish institutional events. It brings us together. It connects us with our tradition. We've all had more than enough of kosher style, Jewish light, and just Jewish in our organizational life. A religion that's over 4,000 years old, that has produced some of the world's greatest thinkers and has shaped Western civilization, deserves better than the lowest common denominator of anything. Today, we barely use Hebrew in Jewish communal life. We too often ignore Jewish texts or teachings, valorizing at times our own woeful ignorance. We sometimes minimize the role or significance of Israel because of political differences. We now say Jewish values as a substitute for Jewish law, meaning we don't talk about halacha. We just talk about Jewish values. And they're both important, but they're separate things. And we shouldn't, shy away from talking about actual Jewish law. While so many Jews are experiencing namaste in yoga and Far Eastern traditions, in the Jewish world at large, God is virtually absent from the conversation. This version of Judaism is so lukewarm, it's passionless. Why would anyone support or invest in something so bland and lifeless? It is, in essence, a betrayal. By the way, for those who were here, however, when it's 4 or 5 weeks ago, when we did Rav Amiel, and we studied his drasha, where he talked about, I think there's some really powerful overlaps. His drasha, where he talked about, where the Jewish community is falling apart because we are too good at 3 things. What were they? They were shalom, we're too good at peace. Emet, we're too good at truth. And Yirat Shamayim, we're too good at revering God. And what did he mean by those? He meant we have too much peace because we don't fight for, I want to be a leader and I want to get an aliyah and I want to take part. That the people used to fight about who got those roles, but now nobody cares anymore. Give it to the other guy. It's not that they're being humble. They're disinterested. They're turned off. And we have too much truth because people are willing to say, I don't keep this Jewish law. They have no shame or embarrassment about just proclaiming broadly that they disregard parts of the tradition. And we have too much reverence of God. We don't even say God's name anymore. We're so, and we have to bring back all those things. There's actually a lot of overlap between that and what she's talking about here. Be proud of Jewish law and be proud to advocate for it. Introduce God into conversation. All these different pieces. I think there's some really striking overlap. Last paragraph. I still want you to make your dinner kosher, but don't do it for me. Like a good Jewish mother, I'll just watch you eat. Make your dinner and your organization more than just Jewish. Let's not sit on the sidelines and reduce a magnificent, majestic tradition to an empty pluralism. We are too content-rich, history-saturated, and purpose-driven. That's a big Rabbi Sachs purpose-driven. To do that to our people. To be a serious Jew, Prager writes, one must attempt to be committed equally to God, law, and peoplehood. Imbalance toward any of these has had terrible consequences, indeed. So I thought this was just a great piece. You could agree or disagree with her stance, but I think we see her as someone who's not just talking about the big ideas and faith, but is sort of drilling down and is not afraid, as someone who moves about all kinds of circles in Jewish community, to sort of push for a stronger presence of Jewish tradition and Jewish law in our communal institutional life. So I thought it was just like, and as you see, she weaves together a current article by Dennis Prager. I mean, here there's less kind of Jewish text and more ideas. We'll see more explicit Jewish text in the next piece. That was number 1. I'm going to share the second one. And then I think before we get to leadership, I'll pause if anybody wants to comment. So thanks for bearing with me as we continue to journey through her writing. And I think also, again, I find her writing, her language beautiful, almost poetic, but also really conversational and accessible. And I think she combines that in a really wonderful way. Okay. Next, and this one spoke to me at again, will turn out to be a pun here, spoke to me in a way that I felt like I'm happy someone's out there saying this, because this is something I think about, but I've never written anything about it or spoken about it very often. I don't think it's a big problem in our community, but I do see the incursion of this topic, our kind of clean speech topic versus vulgar speech. And I think it was powerful to discover this writing, which I don't remember having seen when it was published in 2017. But I see it. I found it in my research of her writings. Here it is. Exit Ramp, an Assault on Language, from the New Jersey Jewish News, June 7th, 2017. My assumptions about civility are at great risk. I'm tired of people who talk loudly on their cell phones in public places, or who watch movies or listen to music without headphones. I have little patience for the litterers, the loud gum chewers, and the knuckle crackers. On a plane recently, I actually saw a man repeatedly blow his nose into a handkerchief and then hang it over his armrest. Gross, you're thinking. Me too. I need company in my new fight to preserve the ways of old, when people actually flushed public toilets. Again, Rabbi Sachs, can't picture him writing the words flushed public toilets, but she does, and I love that. Today's screed is related to a civil assault on language. Have you noticed it? It's not that adults curse more, but I have noticed that even in fairly traditional circles, curse words are used as flourishes in conversations and in writing in ways that are new, disturbing, and distracting. We've all witnessed someone apologize to a nun or a rabbi for letting a cuss word slip out in their presence. This may be a thing of the past. Some friends and students don't hesitate to use curse words in explaining an idea or judging an opinion. And they're not the passable words like HE double hockey sticks, but gesunte curse words that used to be totally taboo. Maybe cursing is liberating as stress relief, or the only reasonable reaction to anything from a stubbed toe to tragic news. Dropping a language bomb signals to others how strongly one feels about a situation. Maybe people find it fun or revel in vulgarity as a sign of independence from convention, the way a kid curses to impress peers. I said, by the way, before getting there, I think in polemical writing, it's always a good strategy to anticipate the arguments of your, of the opposing side, give them a little airtime, and then respond to them. And I think, she does that beautifully here. She acknowledges what might be the motivations, and we can identify with those things. I side with George Washington, who wrote a whole book on civility. Forget the weird cherry tree story. Our first president was a stickler about decent language, and she quotes, "The foolish and wicked practice of profane cursing and swearing is a vice so mean and low that every person of sense and character detests and despises it." If cursing is the fashion today, then maybe it's become the new normal. Sorry, George. Civility is subject to time and place. Yet I find myself unable to go there. In other words, this is again a moment where she comes sort of back to certain things have to be timeless. We can't just say things change with the times, and it's very kind of a Torah-driven message. Yes, there are things that evolve, but some things are absolutely forever. Here's my hypothesis. We curse more because our capacity to articulate ideas with accuracy and clarity is dying. Tweeting and texting have not only made terrible spellers of us all, they have also robbed us of sophisticated means of self-expression, right? So now she's delved into a hypothesis which makes this part of a bigger challenge in our society today. And that's what I really love about this article. She doesn't just say, there's a lot more cursing today and it's terrible and we should stop. She says, I get what the motivations are, but I don't think those are sufficient enough. But I actually diagnose this as part of a bigger problem we have to be paying close attention to in society today. Right? They have also robbed us of sophisticated means of self-expression. This includes our verbal reactions to pain and tragedy, to surprise and shock. We have allowed 4 letters to replace full sentences. And in so doing, we've let go of the nuance that language offers us to express our deepest feelings. Right? So it's like, one of the things we decry about social media and Twitter, whatever, is our reduced attention span, right? We write in these little nuggets because that's all people have the attention for. But she's also saying we increasingly lose our capacity to express sophisticated and nuanced things when we get in the habit of little short pithy things and of taking something more sophisticated and putting it into a 4-letter word. If this sounds old-fashioned, meaning her kind of attitude, it's because it is. This approach to language dates all the way back to Genesis. Here's the pivot, right? She's done George Washington, and now she comes to Torah. Dates all the way back to Genesis, when language was the building block of creation. And that's, obviously that's a huge topic to unpack. God speaks the world into creation. She just drops it in a sentence and moves on. Some of this discussion, there are many rich debates on why Hebrew is called Lashon HaKodesh, holy talk. Some of this discussion is covered masterfully in Louis Gleinert's new book, The Story of Hebrew. If you start off with an assumption that words should be holy, desanctifying them becomes all the more crass. To understand just how deep this debate on the holiness of language extends, we need to spend a few minutes in the world of Jewish medieval scholarship. Maimonides, that's Rambam, in his magnum opus, The Guide to the Perplexed, writes that one indication Hebrew is holy is that it contains no words for genitalia. And now she quotes from the Rambam. I have also a reason and cause for calling our language the holy language. Do not think it is exaggeration or error on my part. It is perfectly correct. The Hebrew language has no special name for the organ of generation in females or in males, nor for the act of generation itself, nor for semen, nor for secretion. The Hebrew has no original expressions for these things, and only describes them in figurative language and by way of hints, as if to indicate thereby that these things should not be mentioned, and therefore should have no names. We ought to be silent about them. Nachmanides, that's the Ramban, disagrees. The reason why, and now she quotes from the Ramban, the reason why our rabbis refer to the language of the Torah as the holy language is because the words of the Torah, its prophets, and all holy matters are stated in that language. It is the language that the Holy One, blessed be He, speaks to God's prophets and God's nation. Maimonides points to the words, Nachmanides points to the concepts. Either way, both point to holiness. Now, by the way, I have to pause here and say, and I think if she were writing a more expansive version of this, I think she might agree with me. Here is an instance where I personally would say, I think Rambam's viewpoint, he came out of a particular worldview. I think it's okay to talk about body parts by their actual names and to talk about sex by its actual name. So I think there's a little bit, I would, tweak this piece a little bit, but I think her point that she's trying to extrapolate a little bit is kind of, we're cautious about words and what it means to be a holy language is to think about what words are we using and what words are appropriate or inappropriate, even if I might, quibble a little on the content of which words. That's on the Rambam. On Nachmanides, I think it's a really powerful idea as well, the idea that it's called Lashon HaKodesh because all the holy concepts of our Torah are expressed in it. Yes, modern Hebrew does have words for all those things, yes. Holiness is really hard to achieve, but it's a good benchmark for language. It makes human speech aspirational and not only conversational. It encourages us not to cheapen the gift that separates us from other animals, but to use it wisely and well to express a fuller range of ideas and emotions. Hashtag George was right. So I thought this was, again, just a great piece, opening up a conversation, about our use of language, diagnosing a problem, naming a problem, attempting to diagnose it, understanding where it might be coming from, grounding in both kind of secular morals, if you could say such a thing, and which you can, secular morals and our religious tradition, this concept. And so I thought it was another great characteristic piece. And again, her conversational style, her down-to-earth style, and also her, I think beautiful, readable, but beautiful style. Before we do a little bit on leadership, I can just open it up for questions and comments.
I'd like to see a group of teenagers discuss this.
Yes, Mama Toby says, I'd love to see a group of teenagers discuss that. Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, it's adults, I think, by the way, that I would agree with her. I have noticed, even in my own social settings, more profanity than 10 years ago. So I think it's interesting. Yeah, Bernie, go ahead.
Thanks. So I agree with the second piece as you do, and I also agree with the comment that you had about the Rambam about using explicit names of sexual organs, etc., etc. It's the first piece that I find more difficult. And I agree with Aaron Potek, who was quoted in there, that it's not so bad to have kosher meals available for those who need it, but I also feel that to impose that on people who have no interest in eating kosher is not appropriate. I think in another context of the religious coercion that goes on in Israel. And I'm not too happy about that, where the rabbi tries to impose its views on a population which is not interested in its views.
Right.
And in terms of Dennis Prager, who happens to be a former camper of mine, in relation to Dennis Prager, I'm not sure where he would fall on that kosher food. I don't think he explicitly said whether he would be in favor of having everybody eat kosher, because he really said in the piece that it doesn't matter to him where they lie in terms of their practices, in terms of this or that, as long as they are serious Jews.
Yes. Good, Iris.
But she mentioned the kosher meals with regard to Jewish organizations.
Right,
Events,
right.
So it's not like, someone who attends a bar.
Can't hear.
Bar
I'll
dinner.
repeat it.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. So Iris was responding and saying, Dr. Brown's argument in the article was not this necessarily exactly the same, sort of a kind of question back to Bernie. It wasn't an advocacy for what people do in their private lives. It wasn't saying everyone should keep kosher. It was saying when we gather under the aegis of Jewish communal institutions, those Jewish communal institutions should, uphold a core Jewish practice, which is, kosher keeping, and should provide kosher food to all. I think the question, I think your point, Bernie, is an important one about the issues of religious coercion. I think she would make the case, and it resonates with me, that it's sort of in the realm of food, you're providing people with food, so they have the option to eat non-kosher anytime, anywhere they want. But you're sort of saying, when you come into my Jewish communal institutions event, what we are serving is kosher for all. But I can understand it could feel like religious coercion, maybe not so much for a random participant, but maybe for the planners, right? The people who say, I work in this Jewish communal institution, I'm a serious Jew, I'm creating this event for our constituents, and this is the food that I think is really, really great, and I would like everyone to get a chance to experience. Why should I be compelled to have to make that kosher for all? So I think it's a robust and healthy conversation. I hear both sides. I think I incline actually towards her side, but I think you're asking maybe, I think there's sort of both a principled question about pluralism here, and then there's maybe also a strategic question, Bernie, that you're raising, which is when does doing something which people experience as religiously coercive sort of backfire? I think that's a related question, which should be considered. Yeah, Toby.
Okay, this is coming from somebody who's not strictly kosher, or as my daughter says, not kosher at all. The two things that are vying for each other here, one is a choice to be non-kosher, and the other is what people feel is a commitment or a requirement to be kosher. There is no Jewish law or value that requires you to be non-kosher.
Right.
That is just a choice.
Right.
So as someone who sometimes makes that choice, if I go to a Jewish organization, I think we need to honor those that feel that there's a requirement.
Yes.
To
Yes.
be kosher.
Yes. And I don't think
things are not equal.
Correct. It's right. It's not a clash of values between the affirmative value of non-kosher as a thing. It's just about freedom of choice. And that's why I think everybody would agree kosher option needs to be made available. She's making the stronger case. We should just decide as a collective Jewish community, no matter the practices of our constituents, that when we do something as Jewish communal organizations, we should make it kosher for all. And we've had a good little discussion of the pros and cons.
Not like we're not giving them food.
Right, of course. Right, exactly. Yes. Okay, good. Let's go on to a little bit of the leadership stuff before we wrap up. So two pieces here on leadership. This is now page 8 in the packet. And this one I loved because it was an instance of kind of close reading of culture towards integrated with Tanakh and integrated with leadership. And by the way, I think her choice to use biblical texts as kind of her primary subjects for a lot of her writing is of course intentional, because it reaches a much wider audience. When you publish something on rabbinic texts for a non-Jewish audience or for a less learned Jewish audience, it's often much harder to access, even if you can do it in an accessible way. But anybody might say, oh, the book of Jonah, I'd love to see a commentary about that, the book of Esther. And so I think it's intentional in terms of thinking about global communities of faith and how we reach people, and the idea that there are leadership lessons from so many books of the Bible, I think is a message she's trying to put out there. And so the fact that a lot of her books are commentaries on biblical texts, I think is intentional, and sort of like, biblical books, not sort of the cherry picking approach, but saying we're going to work our way through this whole book and we're going to see the richness that's, goes through all of it. So here is from January 31st, 2020, originally published on the Wexner Foundation blog, Innovation and the Reinvention of Self, Reflections on Esther. So you see this painting by Botticelli of Esther, and she writes, Botticelli's Esther stands alone, just outside the walls of Ahasuerus's palace. The perspective seems off. She's taller than the outer walls, gathering the folds of her voluminous dark pink dress in her right arm, her left hand pointing heavenward. That seemed to me like a little bit sermonic license. I don't know. It's up. I don't know if it's really heavenward, but still great. As a rabbi, we get plenty of sermonic license here. She may be heading for a life of royalty, but her hand suggests that she knows who she must ultimately answer to. Her life's mission extends far beyond the limits of the stone walls ahead. Her natural verdant surroundings, show those again. Her natural verdant surroundings will soon be swallowed by the human structure ahead when Esther enters the palace, much the way life as she once knew it would be gone forever. Esther is almost never painted as a solitary figure. Here I love, now this is like the sort of the, art history, biblical art history chiddush that she's introducing. Esther is almost never painted as a solitary figure. I would not have known that. You know me, I like to look up biblical words, and I can say this word rarely appears in this way, but she did a little research on, the presentations of Esther in art. In other traditional compositions, she is primped and groomed by her royal maidens, surrounded by courtiers, or stands weeping before the king, or pointing an angry finger at Haman, her nemesis. These paintings remind us that the text of Esther is crowded, right? So now she says, of course the paintings have her with other people. Read the book of Esther. She's always with other people. There are always ministers and gatekeepers milling about and offering advice. There are beauty contestants and an entire postal service at the ready. Even Esther's most definitive leadership moment, when she finally understands that to lead is to risk her life, she cannot speak to Mordecai directly, but through a messenger. When she calls a fast, she summons all those serving her to do the same. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan, right? Assemble them and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. She is never alone. Botticelli, with his innovative composition, helps us imagine Esther's inner life just before everything changes for her. It's a moment not even the book of Esther offers us, right? She's pointing out to us this painting, it's a midrash. It shows us a little moment that the text never even shows us. And as we look at the painting from a leadership perspective, Botticelli challenges us to stop ourselves. I love that idea, right? How do we look at the world from a leadership perspective, to stop ourselves right before entering a space that may require our reinvention, to reflect on who we really are before jumping into new responsibilities and a network of people, all of whom may want something from us. In this quiet painting of an outsized Esther, the artist invites us to consider several questions she may have been asking herself. When I lead, who really has authority over me? How do I both operate within a space and transcend it? As I surround myself with new people in a new position, how do I hold on to my identity and my values? This, by the way, was written for the Wexner Fellowship blog. It's a blog of Jewish leaders, so very intentional, her choice of material. Reinvention requires seclusion. Else we run the risk of always defining ourselves in relation to what others need from us or who they want us to be. Botticelli gave Esther what she may have needed most and never gotten, a moment of stillness before a life of leadership took over. So that's just a great insight, really wonderful piece. Two of the things that I've seen in a lot of Dr. Erica Brown's writings are this idea of course, time and space for introspection and reflection in the context of leadership. And the second thing she emphasizes all the time is the need for leaders and all of us to continually keep learning. Okay, last little bit that I want to share. And this is from a fantastic podcast, which just coincidentally was released about a month ago as I was preparing for our learning together. There's a podcast series called The Orthodox Conundrum. It's Rabbi Scott Kahn, and he interviews thought leaders and rabbinic figures and all kinds of folks from the Orthodox Jewish community and beyond on the contemporary issues and concerns of the Orthodox community. It's really well done, really great content, usually about an hour long podcast, and I highly recommend it. as they say on all the podcast ads, you can get it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or, wherever you get your audio. You can also look it up on the internet and play the episode straight from the internet. If you look up Orthodox Conundrum, that should be the first hit. So there's an hour-long interview that he does with Dr. Erica Brown, around her new book on Kohelet, around, her perspectives on leadership. And I excerpted here 2 quotes, one from about 50 minutes in and one from about an hour and 10 minutes in, that stuck out to me in terms of reflections about leadership, especially here talking a little bit about the transition from sort of classic leaders to everybody as leaders. Here's what she says. And you can, this is literally a transcript I hand typed from the podcast. So she's in conversational, even more than her written conversational style. This is just the way she speaks, as we all do. It's a little choppier because it's just the spoken word. What I see is that there are certain families who really take leadership seriously. They create an expectation that in their family, people will lead. And I'll just say I was very blunt about it with my own children. When I wrote my first book, which was a leadership book, I dedicated it to the 4 of them, and I said it outright for everyone to see, that they should grow up to take leadership roles in their own communities. I don't know how many people feel the honor and nobility of what that is, and the responsibility. This is not about one generation. Jewish continuity matters because the next generation feels it's important to lead. So I would say that in that sense, sometimes I've seen in the leadership work that I do, that there's a leadership DNA, that there are families who talk about it, take it seriously. They make sure their children understand their philanthropic causes and why they're important to them, the institutions that are important to them. So here she's talking about the idea that if we want Jewish continuity and Jewish leadership, we have to, talk to the people over whom we have some kind of influence or impact, and tell them how important it is that we expect that they be leaders, tell them what leadership means and why it matters to us, what we care about and why. And that she sort of sees families in which that's perpetuated. Here, the context of this quote is he asked her a question, Rabbi Scott Kahn asked her a question about nepotism. Do you see a lot of people just sort of putting the next generation, their own children, their own friends, is leadership, as Jewish leadership sort of susceptible to this problem? And she sort of talks about that she doesn't see that much of it, and that she sees the positive flip side, which is we actually need people to be inculcating in the next generation leadership, not just putting them on because they're their children, but helping them understand why the things that the parents do are important to them and why they hope the children will find their own paths to leadership. In the podcast, she's very wide-ranging in her topics, and I just had in my head one other thing she spoke about that I wanted to mention here. Oh yeah, she also talks about, even though she has a whole book about how to respond to when Jewish leaders do bad things, she actually, in the podcast, she also says one of the impediments to people taking up leadership is you go to any Shabbos table and all people are doing is bashing the leaders. They're criticizing the rabbi, because it's important to offer, constructive feedback and say what we like or don't like. But she said, we have a culture which is actually, of course, we need freedom of expression, but we have to be more charitable to our leaders, A, because the work is hard and they're trying really hard, and B, because if we just, talk all the time critically of our leaders, why will our children ever want to be leaders? They'll just see that this is a thing we criticize. So I thought that was an interesting piece that she mentioned by the by. And now the second quote. A lot of people I see, when they stop being shul president and they think, oh, I can't even walk into that shul. I won't even walk into the building. I think to myself, okay, take a little recovery because you need it. And after 6 or 12 months, think about what you're going to do with all the leadership experience you've acquired, because we're in this for the long run. This isn't, I lead this year and I play golf next year. That a Jewish community does not make. Healthy communities need an infusion of leadership at all levels, at all ages. Boards need to have the composition of people of all financial levels, different professional capacities, different ways of thinking, different ages. That's what makes our community diverse, and it's what makes our community work. I think the sort of description of the Jewish leader who is the president and then says, I can't even come into shul. I feel we're incredibly blessed that we, really have the opposite. In the Bayit, a lot of our past shul presidents, offer to continue to make themselves available and, and continue to be deeply invested and supportive of the shul's mission and values. And I think that's one of the beautiful, beautiful things about the Bayit and its leadership, is that it's a place that, supports its leaders, empowers its leaders, and in which leaders, want to continue to give and also are ready and willing to step back to make room for other leaders. And I think that's something, of course, Rav Avi established and all our incredible lay leaders have built on and strengthened. And we continue to try to do and empower in all generations. I thought this was a beautiful piece. The last thing in the packet, which we're not going to read, was probably her. We almost went chronologically in her writing and speaking, and the last thing in the packet is probably the most contemporary. It's something from winter 2022 called "Visionary Leadership for a Jewish Future" in the relatively new Sapir Journal. I believe edited by Brett Stevens, if I'm not mistaken. And the journal was sort of called like Aspirations, and they invited Jewish leaders in different fields to write short essays called like moonshots. What's your dream? What's your kind of off in the future, hope and utopian vision for the Jewish world? And so she wrote one about kind of Jewish education and Jewish community called "Visionary Leadership for a Jewish Future." One of her central ideas is long haul Jewish leaders, something that builds exactly off of what the last quote that we saw. It's not a 1 year or even a decade long endeavor. You got to stick with it for the long haul. She quotes in the middle her teacher and mentor, just circling back to how we open. She writes, "When one of my long haul heroes, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, gave his investiture speech as chief rabbi of the United Congregations in Britain, he made this clear, quote, 'I will never give up or relax or despair,' end quote. I will never give up or relax or despair." I think
Rabbi Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Olson.
Yeah, I met Rabbi Sachs once.
Amazing.
I talked to him. I said, the Chinese are taking over. He said, two Chinese. And how he talked to me, laughed at me. He was at the RJC. He was a guest there at RJC.
Yes, he
many
was a
years
guest
ago.
at
So
the
I
RJC.
met Rabbi Sachs.
Yes. So that last piece is about long haul heroes, and then a handful of ways she sees the Jewish community can make progress towards that vision of empowered leadership, of broader education for all. So that's for those who got my email yesterday, the packet is linked there, and you can read that last one. I can email the packet to anybody who wants. So hopefully we had a chance. Yes, an amazing list at the end. Hopefully we had a chance to learn a little bit about the incredible Dr. Erica Brown, her really position using Rabbi Sacks as kind of like a comparison and foil for her style, and and to actually delve into a couple of the topics that she raised for our consideration: the way we use speech, the question of pluralism in our Jewish communal institutions around food, some thoughts about visions of leadership at an individual and collective level. Happy to take any last questions or comments before we wrap up. Great. All right. So next Thursday is Rav Ezra, the final one on Rav Shimshon Raphael, and it's been wonderful to get a chance to delve into the modern Jewish thinkers together with everybody. And love to Mom and Dad. Looking forward to seeing you in a week and a half and or a little more. And great to see everybody and be with everybody. Thanks to those in person and on Zoom. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.